A cold billionaire stops his car in the storm, only to find the woman he once held for just one unforgettable night, pregnant and terrified of him. She refuses to speak, but her eyes scream danger. Who is she running from? Why does she shake when he gets close? When he drags her into the safety of his mansion, the truth she's been hiding explodes into a battle for survival, because someone powerful wants her gone. And now that he knows she carries his child, he'll burn the world to uncover the secret she buried. Where are you listening to me from? Tell me in the comments. I love seeing our family from all around the world. And hey, please watch this story till the very end, because I promise you, it's going to touch your soul in a way you never expected. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe right now. Your support keeps these emotional journeys alive. All right, are you ready? Let's dive into the story. Rain drenched Reena's trembling hands as she shielded her swollen belly, every drop cold enough to feel like judgment from the universe, because she had run for too long and there was nowhere left to hide as the streetlights flickered like dying stars above her head, her heart pounding with the fear that tonight everything would fall apart and the very truth she had protected with her life would finally be exposed. The night smelled of danger, and thunder groaned like a warning from the sky as she wrapped her arms tightly around her belly, whispering promises to the child within that she would keep them safe no matter what price destiny demanded. But destiny didn't care. Destiny had cruel timing, and destiny arrived in the form of a sleek black luxury car that cut through the rain-soaked street like a blade. The engine's growl echoed through her bones, forcing her breath to freeze in her chest, because only one man she knew drove a monster like that, and if it was him, no, she prayed it wasn't him. Yet her eyes widened in silent horror as the door opened and the coldest part of her past stepped out, wearing a suit tailored to power and heartbreak. Philip Voss, the CEO whose name could silence rooms and shatter futures, the man she had loved for one unforgettable night. One night that gave her everything and took everything away. His presence made the rain feel hotter on her skin. Or maybe that was fear trying to escape through every pore, because the moment his icy gaze locked on her, she felt stripped to the very soul. And for the first time since she left, she wished darkness had swallowed her whole before he saw what she was hiding beneath her loose-soaked clothes. His eyes widened with disbelief and something darker, betrayal, the kind that could tear worlds apart, because the curve of her belly was undeniable now, a silent confession she could no longer run from, a truth he had demanded, but she had refused to give. Reena's voice trapped itself inside her throat as memories stabbed their way back into consciousness. The way his hands once held her like she was a precious secret. The way his lips promised forever even if his heart had been too damaged to stay. The way she woke up alone with nothing but fear and a warning to disappear if she ever wanted the child to live. Rumors of Philip Voss being a cruel monster echoed bitterly in her mind, whispers that he had never wanted an heir because heirs brought vulnerability and enemies, whispers that he destroyed anyone who could threaten his empire, including the unborn. Those lies forced her to run, forced her to trade comfort for terror, love for survival, and now those same lies stood between them like a loaded gun ready to fire. "You vanished," Philip said, his voice sharp enough to slice through the thunder, and even through the rain she saw the pain behind his words, the questions he had carried like open wounds she never allowed him to heal. "You vanished and left me with questions that destroyed me," he continued, each syllable trembling with fury he was barely containing. Reena shook her head slowly, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks as she tried to step back, but her body, her burden, betrayed her balance, forcing her to grab the rusting bus stop pole to stay upright, praying he wouldn't come closer, praying he would leave before he discovered what she had been hiding from him for 8 terrifying months. But prayers meant nothing to a man like Philip Voss, a man used to control, a man used to owning the truth, So he stepped closer anyway, ignoring the rain pounding against his expensive suit, his jaw tightening with every inch that reduced the distance between them, until he was close enough for her to smell the sharp luxury of his cologne, close enough for her to feel the heat rising from his fury, close enough for her heart to break all over again. His hand shot out with a possessiveness that sent chills crawling up her spine, his fingers gripping hers like a claim she could not refuse, as if 8 months of running meant nothing, as if he had always known she would return to him eventually, whether willingly or broken. 8 months, he whispered, and the tremor in his voice softened the steel for a single stolen moment. "And this is what you hid?" His other hand gestured toward her stomach, his anger caught in a battle with a strange longing she wasn't ready to face. Reena's breath shattered into fragments as fear and love collided inside her, because if she spoke one wrong word, everything could burn, including the innocent heartbeat inside her that trusted her completely. She felt the baby kick as if sensing danger, urging her to protect them no matter what sacrifice fate demanded. Philip stepped even closer, his voice dropping into a raw, unfiltered ache as he asked the question that had been haunting the space between them for far too long. "Is that my child?" The world paused, rain suspended, breaths stolen, hearts unable to beat, because the answer could rebuild or destroy both of them. The bus stop lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging them into a suffocating shadow, where her silence spoke louder than any confession. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching with the storm now raging inside him, a storm stronger than the one roaring from the sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating his expression, rage, heartbreak, betrayal, hope, everything all at once, before darkness reclaimed him. "Reena, answer me," he demanded, his tone dripping with finality, the kind that promised consequences if she dared hold back. But her lips refused to move, her fear stitching them shut, because the truth wasn't just a truth, it was a threat that could cost her everything. He reached for her face, his thumb trembling as it brushed her cheek, sparks of old intimacy breaking through the cold war they had become, reminding her of the night they created life out of passion and vulnerability. That memory, dangerous and beautiful, made her knees shake, because she had never stopped loving him, even when running was the only way to keep that love alive. Her silence carved new wounds into his heart, and she saw the transformation in his eyes, rage beginning to awaken, the kind of rage that burned empires and rewrote fates. The wind roared, sending her drenched hair flying wildly as thunder cracked above them again like a warning. Time was running out, lies were piling up, and fate was no longer patient with her fear. Philip's breath brushed her ear as he leaned closer, his whisper a loaded promise that made her pulse stumble. "If that baby is mine, then no force on earth will take you away from me again." His words felt like protection and prison all at once, a vow that could save or destroy her, depending on which version of him survived the storm inside. Reena's heart screamed to tell the truth, to trust him one last time, but the memory of threats hissed into her ear like poison. "He'll kill the baby if he knows." Her pulse throbbed in her throat, her vision blurring as panic clawed at her chest, because even though she wanted to believe the warmth hiding under his cold exterior, she had seen enough of life to know that love didn't always win against fear. Philip took another step forward, leaving her no room to flee, his body heat wrapping around her like a trap disguised as comfort, and she felt the weight of his curiosity crushing her silence. The rain poured harder, drumming against the abandoned bus stop roof like a heartbeat racing out of control, and she realized the universe had cornered her tonight, with nowhere to run, no lies left to hide behind, and no guarantee that revealing the truth wouldn't trigger a disaster she couldn't undo. She pressed her shaking palm against her belly, silently pleading for strength, for courage, for a sign that choosing honesty wouldn't end the miracle she carried. Philip noticed the gesture, and for a flicker of a moment, His rage melted into pure fear, a fear he tried to hide but failed, because the idea of losing what might be his child terrified him more than any enemy ever could. "Tell me," he whispered again, his voice cracking like glass under pressure, revealing the vulnerable man buried beneath his armor, the man she once tasted passion with under a sky full of stars, the man she believed she could never have. Riena's lips finally parted, but sound refused to come, because how could she explain everything? The threats, the lies, the escape that nearly ended her life. Thunder exploded overhead, drowning her unfinished confession and snapping Philip back into anger. His hand tightened around hers, not enough to hurt, but enough to show he wouldn't accept silence as an answer any longer. "You think running protects you," he growled, his frustration trembling into heartbreak. "You think hiding this from me saves us?" His voice dropped lower, darker. "You have no idea what I'm capable of when it comes to protecting what's mine." That claim made her breath hitch, because if the baby was his in his mind, then everything had already changed. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the fear in her eyes that told him more truth than her lips ever could, and for a moment neither of them spoke, both realizing they were standing at a crossroads that could rewrite their lives. Reena tried to pull her hand away, but Philip refused to let go, his grip a promise that silence wouldn't be tolerated, not tonight. "Reena," he said one last time, softer this time, like her name was a prayer he had memorized in the dark. "Please, don't lie to me." That single word, "please," shook her more than his anger ever could, because she had never imagined Philip Voss begging for anything. She opened her mouth to finally speak, to surrender the secret that had consumed her soul for months, but before a single syllable could escape, a sudden blinding flash shattered the night. Tires screeched on wet asphalt behind them, headlights roaring closer, and Reena's heart leapt in terror as a vehicle sped toward the bus stop like a predator hunting its prey, its speed too fast, its aim too precise, its intent unmistakably violent. Philip's eyes sharpened with deadly awareness as he jerked her into his arms, shielding her with his body just as the car swerved dangerously close, water exploding around them in a vicious spray. The mystery vehicle didn't stop. It sped off into the darkness like a ghost with unfinished business, leaving behind the stench of threat that Reena recognized all too well. Philip's grip tightened protectively, his fury now shifting from her to the invisible enemy who dared threaten her in his presence. Reena's heartbeat pounded against his chest, fear choking her blood as she realized the nightmare had followed her, and that she was never meant to be safe, not without him. Philip turned her face toward his expression carved with lethal determination, his next words a deadly vow whispered into the storm. "Silent or not, I will find out the truth." And with that promise burning in the dark, chapter 1 ends, not with answers, but with danger closing in from every direction, and a truth that could change everything once it finally breaks free. Rainwater still clung to Reena's eyelashes as Philip pushed the car door open for her, his movements stiff and controlled, like a man fighting the beast rising inside him. And when she hesitated for just one terrified second, his eyes snapped to hers with a warning that left no room for resistance, forcing her trembling legs to step inside the black leather prison waiting for her. The door slammed, sealing her fate, and Philip slid into the driver's side with a jaw carved in ice, gripping the steering wheel like he could strangle the truth out of it. The car surged forward, and the city lights streaked past them like ghosts fleeing a storm, while Reena held her swollen belly close, whispering silent apologies to the little heartbeat she carried. The air between them matched the weather outside, cold, violent, impossible to escape. Philip didn't look at her, but his voice cracked through the silence like a blade. "You think running protects you?" He breathed hard, his chest rising with anger and ache at the same time. "You think fear will save that child?" The word child made her flinch, and he noticed everything tonight. His knuckles turned white with the truth he wasn't ready to say aloud. His child. Reena forced her gaze down, refusing to meet the accusation burning in his eyes. All she could manage was a quiet, shaky, "I did what I had to," and Philip laughed, hollow, pained, like her answer was a wound. The more she kept quiet, the more his questions became storms inside him. And by the time they arrived at the private restaurant, he had only one mission left: break her silence before it destroyed them both. The staff recognized him instantly and scrambled like terrified birds to clear every table, turning the luxurious space into a locked cage made of marble, chandeliers, and polished silver. The night's soft music died mid-melody, lights dimmed, curtains shut tight, a world created for confrontation. Reena sat where he guided her, every movement slow, cautious, as if she feared one wrong breath would bring catastrophe. Philip sat across from her, elbows on the table, gaze sharp enough to pierce bone. "This dinner isn't over until you tell me the truth," he said, each word dropping heavy like iron chains around her soul. She tried to steady her breathing, but every inhale only reminded her how close destruction was, especially when his hand slammed the table with a force that rattled the silverware, his frustration thrashing against the walls like a trapped animal. His temper wasn't loud, it was icy, controlled, and 10 times more dangerous because of it. "I searched every city," he confessed, voice trembling from the effort of holding sanity together. "I tore apart everything I trusted just to find you. And now, this?" His eyes dragged down to her belly, the bump that answered every silent question. Reena's heart nearly burst from the pressure of his attention alone. She reached for her stomach instinctively, shielding the life inside as if love could be armor, as if fear could give her strength. "I couldn't stay," she whispered, and that was the truth wrapped in a single tear. But Philip wasn't a man who let a single tear end a war. "Why?" he demanded, his voice cracking open with pain that made her flinch harder. "Who convinced you that I was someone to fear?" His breath hitched, and that vulnerability, the kind only love could carve, nearly broke her. Reena swallowed the scream sitting in her throat, remembering the one night her world collapsed. When Serena cornered her with a threat so sharp, it nearly sliced her hope into dust. She looked up, eyes glossy with dread, and forced out the poisonous word, "Your mistress." The temperature in the room dropped to a deadly cold. Philip's posture changed, shoulders stiff, jaw locked, fists curling like he was holding back a hurricane. His eyes darkened, not with confusion, but with fury. "Serena," he repeated, the name tasting like betrayal on his tongue. Wind from the storm outside shook the windows, as if nature itself feared what he would do with that revelation. He leaned forward until their foreheads were almost touching, his whisper more terrifying than a shout. "What did she tell you?" Reena inhaled sharply, torn between truth and safety, but before she could speak, a sudden shift in the air made her freeze. A familiar perfume, sweet, expensive, and suffocating, coated her lungs. Her heart dropped, her hands flew protectively to her belly, and her eyes widened as a silhouette appeared behind Philip, stepping into the chandelier light like a monster from a nightmare who refused to die. Serena. She stood there with a venomous smile painted across her perfect face, dressed in crimson like she came to spill blood. And in that moment, Reena realized she was never meant to escape this nightmare. Serena had followed them, and she wanted a front-row seat to the destruction she planted. Philip turned slowly, his expression shifting from shock to lethal hatred within seconds. "You," he growled, his voice low enough to shake the earth beneath them. Serena tilted her head mockingly, as though she owned the moment, owned him, and her eyes flicked to Reena's stomach with twisted amusement. What a happy little family reunion, she purred, but the poison beneath her tone was enough to rot steel. Reena felt the oxygen drain from the room. Philip stood, his chair scraping sharply, his energy shifting into a man prepared to dismantle kingdoms if necessary. "You don't belong here," he said, each word closing a door Serena would never reopen. But she only smiled wider. "Oh, Philip," she cooed, "you wouldn't want me to share all our secrets, would you?" Her threats slithered through the air like knives searching for a throat. Philip stepped closer, eyes burning with warning. "Don't push me," he warned. Serena leaned closer too, smirking because fear never lived in her bones. Not yet. Reena's heartbeat turned into a violent drum as she watched the two war with words sharp enough to draw blood. The restaurant that once sparkled now felt like a trap with no exits, just walls and witnesses and a ticking time bomb disguised as a woman. Serena slid her hand into her purse, and Philip immediately moved, blocking Reena with his body like a shield. "Whatever you think you can do," he snarled, "it ends now." Serena laughed, soft, cruel. "Oh, darling, it hasn't even begun." Her fingers clamped around her phone, and she raised it like a weapon, her thumb hovering over the screen. Reena's breath hitched. Philip's muscles tensed. Then Serena pressed the call button and smirked. "That's the number," she whispered sweetly. "That destroys her." Reena's eyes widened in terror as she realized Serena wasn't just here to scare her, she came to erase her, permanently. The phone rang once, twice, and Philip's pulse crashed like lightning. He lunged, but he was too late. Someone answered. The night roared with thunder as Philip dragged Reena out of the restaurant, his fist wrapped around her delicate wrist like he was terrified she'd vanish again, and the storm seemed to chase them as they rushed toward his mansion, a place she once thought was heaven, but now felt like a trap lined with velvet and ghosts. When the massive iron gates creaked open and the car rolled inside, her breath caught at the sight of the grand home she once tasted love in, its towering windows glimmering with the echoes of a past she wished she could erase. And as he forced the door open and pulled her into the marble-floored foyer, memories hit her like lightning, his arms pinning her against these very walls, his lips claiming her with a passion so beautiful she thought she'd found her forever, before she learned forever could turn into fear, lies, and blood-chilling threats. The chandelier above cast a soft golden glow across his face, but the fire in his eyes was darker than any night, and she knew this wasn't just jealousy. This was heartbreak, dressed like rage, a wounded beast desperate to understand how his world shattered without warning, and she clutched her belly tighter, silently begging the tiny life inside to stay calm, to stay safe. Philip's voice was sharp enough to slice through bone as he spun her around, his breath uneven with the weight of 8 tortured months, and he stared at her like he was seeing both the woman he fell for and the woman who destroyed him standing in one body. "You ran from me," he breathed, every word shaking with emotions he didn't know how to control, and even though she wanted to deny the accusation, she couldn't. Running wasn't a lie, but a desperate act of survival, so she lowered her gaze to the polished floor as tears burned down her cheeks, and she whispered, "I had to protect my baby," letting the truth slip out like a wounded confession. At that single word, baby, Philip froze, as if lightning struck him straight through the heart, his entire body pulsing in disbelief and betrayal, because it meant he wasn't just losing her. He might have lost a child he never knew, and his fists clenched helplessly at his sides as he whispered, "So you thought the rumors were true? That I would hurt my own blood?" But she couldn't answer, because her voice drowned in guilt that tasted like poison. He took a slow step closer, fear and agony fighting inside his eyes, and for a second, all the walls he built to keep his heart bulletproof cracked open as he reached up and brushed away her tears with fingers that trembled with too much love to hide. His touch, warm and gentle, like he was scared she'd break if he pressed too hard, and Reena felt her knees weaken because this was the same kindness she had once trusted with her soul. The same tenderness that once made her believe even the coldest heart could glow with love, but now it terrified her. Tenderness could turn to punishment in a blink. His lips almost brushed her forehead as he whispered, "Who made you believe I was a monster?" His voice, so soft, so broken, that it shattered every wall she had tried to build between them, because this wasn't power. This was a wounded man begging for a truth that might kill him. And she swallowed, her lips trembling as she forced herself to answer, "Your mistress. She said you'd take the baby away from me. She said you'd destroy me if you found out." And her confession poured from her like rain crashing from the heavens. A shadow of deadly realization crossed Philip's eyes, fury darkening his stare as he replayed every strange lie, every attempt his mistress made to keep Reena away from him, and his chest rose and fell like each breath threatened to explode into violence. But before he could speak, his gaze dropped lower, to her arm, where a faint, jagged scar peeked out from beneath the sleeve of her dress. Instantly his expression changed, eyes widening as if he'd been dragged backward into a nightmare only he remembered, and his voice cracked when he lifted her trembling hand and whispered, "This scar, why is it the same?" An icy chill running down his spine as memories he buried forced themselves back to life, because he recognized that scar. Not just the shape, but the story burned into its edges. He had seen it before, in a file his mistress once made him sign. A file stamped with threats and medical secrets, a file that said Reena did something unforgivable when she disappeared, and suddenly his knees felt weak as he stared at her like she was a living puzzle holding answers to every sleepless night he suffered, and he asked again, slower, darker, "Who did this to you?" Reena felt her lungs collapse under the pressure of his stare, because that scar held the truth she feared the most. The truth about the night she tried to protect her baby from the monster who wasn't Philip at all. The night she bled, the night she nearly lost everything, the night someone tried to erase her pregnancy forever, but she wasn't ready to relive that horror, not yet. Not while Philip's emotions swirled like a storm ready to consume them both. She tried to pull her arm away, but he held it firm, eyes locked on the mark like it was a roadmap to betrayal, his voice lowering to a growl as he demanded, "Tell me what she did to you, what she did to my child." And every fear she ran from cornered her in that mansion where love once bloomed, then rotted into something dangerous. Reena's heartbeat thundered against her ribs, her throat tightening as she tried to speak, tried to breathe, tried to find strength. But before she could utter a single word of the truth that would change everything, a sudden crash echoed through the mansion, something shattering in the darkness of the corridor upstairs, and Philip instantly turned toward the noise with a lethal coldness settling in his eyes. Reena's legs trembled as silence swallowed the room, because she knew exactly what that sound meant. Someone else was here. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. Someone who would do anything to stop the truth from finally coming out. Philip stepped in front of her protectively, jaw set like a man ready to kill, and whispered just for her, "Stay behind me." But her breath had already frozen inside her chest as a horrifying perfume drifted down the staircase, sweet, familiar, and filled with venom, the scent of the very woman who wanted her gone. His mistress was here, watching, listening, smiling in the dark like she owned the place, and the real nightmare was only beginning. The perfume that slithered down the staircase was thick enough to choke the air, the same venomous scent Reena remembered clinging to her nightmares, and as Philip positioned himself between Reena and the shadows, his entire body transformed from a man wounded by love into a predator awakened by betrayal, his jaw tightening with a promise of violence as the echo of heels approached with slow, taunting taps that made Reena's knees weaken, because this wasn't just any woman, this was the monster who hunted her. The one who whispered death against her belly, the one who turned Philip's love into a cage of fear, and now she stood at the edge of the staircase with a cold smirk that dared them to breathe wrong. Philip's heartbeat roared loud enough that Reena could almost feel it shaking through the marble beneath their feet, but she clung to his shirt as if holding on to him was the only way the baby would stay safe. And just when the mistress opened her mouth to spit more poison, Reena's voice trembled into the silence like a terrifying truth rising from the grave. "She threatened me. She told me you murdered your own unborn children just to protect your empire." And the words cracked through the mansion like lightning splitting the sky, forcing Philip's head toward her as disbelief and agony collided inside him, his breath shattering into pieces because that lie had claws sharp enough to mutilate the heart of any man who dared love a woman like her. And for a moment, he looked like his entire world just collapsed under the cruelty he never saw coming. His hands shook, not with fear, but with pure rage, the kind that melted thrones and lit kingdoms on fire. And when he turned his gaze toward the mistress, his eyes were no longer human. They were a storm, hungry for destruction, a declaration that someone had crossed a line even hell couldn't hold back. He stumbled one step back, a wounded titan, realizing he had been puppeteered by a serpent who used his distrust like chains, and he choked out a breath that sounded like a man losing everything at once, whispering, "All these years, you poisoned my mind. You made me believe love was a threat," and betrayal tore into his bones as the cruel truth surfaced. The woman he trusted beside him was the very shadow that robbed him of light. Reena's tears streamed down as she clutched her belly, whispering, "I thought you were dangerous. I thought you would destroy our baby." And that confession cracked Philip open like the sky before a violent storm, because she feared him, not because of who he was, but who the mistress convinced her he could become. Philip moved faster than lightning, pulling Reena against his chest with a grip that trembled from the force of love he had spent months denying himself, and he pressed his hand to the back of her head as if shielding her from every nightmare that had ever chased her, his voice a low, shaking vow as he growled, "You and this baby, you are my family, and if anyone threatens my family, I don't care if it's a mistress or a demon. I will burn this world to ash before I let anyone hurt you." And the power of that promise made Reena's heart collapse into his chest, because she had never heard him speak with this raw, broken desperation before, a man terrified of losing what he only just realized was his entire life. With heartbreaking tenderness, he lowered his lips to the faded scar marking her skin, the scar she tried to hide, the scar that held a story of screams and blood. And he kissed it like he was kissing an old wound inside himself, whispering against her trembling flesh, "You never had to fear me, not even for a second. You are the only thing that ever made me believe in good." But his voice cracked, betraying the hurt his heart could no longer contain. And Reena finally let her weight fall into his arms, letting him hold all the fear away like he always should have. But the walls around them didn't have time to heal. They were already cracking under the pressure of another presence, because as their embrace tightened, a slow clap echoed across the marble floor, slicing through the intimacy like a blade dipped in poison. And when they lifted their heads, the mistress stood closer now, eyes glittering with a satisfaction that tasted like impending violence, her lips twisting into a mockery of a smile as she purred, "Touching, truly touching. But you're too late, Philip. and the venom in her voice coiled around the room like smoke from a fire only she controlled. Reena flinched, instinctively shielding her belly, because she knew what the mistress was capable of. She had felt her hate like claws in the dark before, and Philip's entire body went rigid, his fury finally abandoning all restraint as he stepped forward with the intention of tearing that smug expression off her face. But she simply raised a hand, halting him with a single sentence that froze the blood in his veins. "I'm not done with her. Or the baby." The chandelier flickered overhead, casting shadows that stretched like claws toward the three of them, and for a heartbeat everything stood still. Even time seemed afraid to move, until the mistress began descending the stairs with calm steps, as if she owned the ground beneath her, as if the mansion itself bowed to her will, and every flick of her heel screamed danger. Every breath she exhaled hinted at a war she was ready to finish. Reena tried to speak, but her throat locked tight, terror twisting her voice into silence, and Philip placed a steadying hand behind her, gently guiding her backward, while he stepped forward like a shield of muscle and fury, his stare fixed on the woman who dared threaten what he loved. But the mistress only laughed, a hollow, soulless sound, and murmured, "You think you know the truth? You think she told you everything? Oh, Philip, you're still blind." And the way she said blind made Reena's stomach knot with dread, because there were more secrets. Secrets that could destroy them both. Philip demanded answers, his voice booming with command, but the mistress leaned in close enough for him to feel the frost of her breath and whispered something that made his face drain of color, something quiet enough that Reena couldn't hear, something that made his fists unclench in horror rather than rage. And Reena's heart stumbled because for the first time tonight, fear flashed in Philip's eyes. Whatever the mistress said wasn't a threat. It was a revelation, a dark truth buried deeper than lies. And Philip's voice faltered as he whispered, "That's not possible." Just as the mistress stepped back with a victorious smirk spreading like poison across her lips. And before Reena could demand to know what was said, before Philip could form another word, the mistress reached behind her back and pulled out a gun, its metallic click echoing like the opening of hell's gates. Her finger curled around the trigger, her eyes locked on Reena's belly, and the real fight for the child's life just began. The cold metal of the gun glinted under the chandelier's trembling light, and Reena froze as her heartbeat crashed violently against her ribs, fear crawling like fire beneath her skin, while Philip's arms wrapped protectively around her waist, pulling her backward so fast she barely had time to breathe. But Serena only smirked, hungry for the terror she saw growing in Reena's eyes, the kind of terror she had planted long ago and watered with threats until it bloomed into nightmares. Philip's body shifted, broad shoulders blocking the weapon's line toward Reena's belly, his stance like a wall built with love, fury, and a promise that no bullet on this earth would ever reach the mother of his child if he was still breathing, while Serena's smile twisted into darkness as she hissed, "She was mine to destroy the moment she stole what belonged to me," and every word dripped with jealousy so poisonous it could have killed 1,000 better hearts. Yet Philip didn't flinch, his jaw tightening as he snarled, "You were never mine, Serena, not even for a heartbeat," because now that he truly knew love, every moment with her felt like rot on his soul. Reena trembled against him, her hand subconsciously covering the most precious life she carried, and Philip angled himself so her body disappeared entirely behind his, the full force of his devotion unleashed in the form of desperation he once refused to acknowledge existed. But Serena's eyes burned brighter, the madness in them building like a rising tide as she spit, "You think choosing her makes you safe. It makes you weak." And Philip's expression shifted into a look so disgusted, so broken by the deception he once allowed into his home, that Serena's fury only ignited deeper, because she couldn't accept that power and beauty had lost to love, real love, a love she could never mimic no matter how perfect she pretended to be. Reena's knees wobbled as flashes of the past sparked through her mind. Serena's threats in dark bathrooms, whispered warnings about blood and tiny coffins, lies painted so vividly she believed death itself was coming for her baby. And now that death had a face, a gun, and a smile. Philip's voice dropped into a terrifying, controlled calm that promised imminent violence as he growled, "You hurt the woman I love, and you're lucky I ever let you breathe after that." His words slicing the air like steel blades, and Serena laughed, a wild, broken sound that echoed off the gold-framed walls like a celebration of chaos. Before stepping closer, fingers tightening around the trigger as she hissed, "Love makes you blind, Philip, and blindness gets people killed." But before she could raise the barrel higher toward the unborn child, Philip surged forward, arms stretched out as he roared for her to drop the weapon, and rage darkened his eyes until they looked like storms ready to swallow the mansion whole. Serena didn't drop the gun. Instead, she slowly reached into her other hand and lifted her phone, screen glowing like a loaded weapon of its own, and with one wicked swipe of her thumb, she dialed a number. A number that could turn this night into devastation. Philip knew that call meant power, the kind that could crumble lives and bury secrets under police reports and headlines. And his fury deepened because even without the gun, she could destroy them in ways bullets couldn't reach. Serena's voice dripped icily as she pressed the phone to her ear and whispered, "You will regret choosing her." And Reena's breath caught like a scream she couldn't release, terrified of what fury Serena had summoned through that device, while Philip shoved Reena further behind him, his back now pressed protectively against her chest, as if becoming a living barrier was his only purpose left in this world. But Serena's lips curled with satisfaction as she murmured into the phone, "Send them in." And the chilling click when she ended the call smashed through the silence like a gunshot yet to be fired. Then, before Philip could lunge for the weapon, Serena lifted the phone again, this time turning the screen outward, revealing a video she had recorded days before. Reena running through the streets, terrified and alone, chased by a shadow Serena had planted just out of frame, the footage twisted with lies so believable that any outsider would think Reena a criminal escaping a scene she created, and Serena purred, "This is all it takes for the world to see her as a threat to that baby. Unfit, dangerous." And Philip's muscles tensed with a lethal promise as he spat, "You won't touch them, not with lies, not with bullets, not with anything." But Serena only grinned wider, her finger already hovering over a button that would upload everything to every news outlet in the city. Reena gasped, clutching Philip's arm, fear shaking her down to her bones. Because this wasn't just violence anymore. This was destruction of identity, of motherhood, of the future she dreamed of holding in her arms. And Philip's heart cracked open, hearing every unspoken plea she poured into her trembling grip as he whispered to her, "She will not win." But Serena's eyes gleamed with cruel delight as she lifted her chin, whispering, "Watch me," and pressed send, just as the gun lifted again. The doorbell exploded into a harsh, continuous ring, loud enough to rattle the floor, and Serena laughed because she knew exactly who had arrived, men with handcuffs and orders written in lies. Philip recognized the sirens rumbling outside like thunder approaching, and Reena's hands flew to her mouth as panic seized her throat. But before fear could devour them, Philip turned to her with a seriousness that felt like a last vow, cupping her face with one shaking hand as he breathed, "I will protect you, even if I have to become the monster they fear," because love had become his only weapon now, sharp enough to cut through hell. Serena's phone buzzed with confirmation, video spreading like wildfire, and she stepped down another stair, gun aligned again with Reena's belly now that backup had arrived, her final poisonous smile blooming with triumph, when fists suddenly pounded on the door and voices shouted orders for everyone inside to surrender. The mansion's windows pulsed with red and blue flashes. Boots thundered against the porch. Reena whimpered, and Philip's voice shook with rage as he whispered, "This isn't over." Because now the enemy was both inside and outside. And one wrong move might mean he loses them both before he even gets to call them family. Philip barely had time to blink, let alone take a breath, when the ballroom doors slammed open with a thunderous crash that startled every guest into silence. His heart lurched as uniformed officers poured into the room like a flood of chaos, dressed in authority, cutting through the music and laughter with cold shouts that froze the atmosphere. Flashlights glared, boots thundered, and the once elegant celebration transformed into a war zone of fear and confusion. Reena instinctively pressed a trembling hand over her belly, her instinct to protect the precious life inside her overwhelming every other thought. Philip's entire soul jumped into panic, and the protective fire in his chest burst into flames as he wrapped a steadying arm around her, shielding her from whatever madness Serena had unleashed. He didn't know what charges were coming, but he knew one thing. Serena had called the devil, and now the devil stood inside their happiness. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked, pointing directly at Reena as if she were a criminal rather than a terrified pregnant woman simply trying to breathe. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, whispers forming poisonous judgments way too fast. Philip's eyes widened in disbelief, his throat tightening painfully. "What the hell is this?" he thundered, voice echoing off the marble floors. But Serena stepped forward, arms crossed like she owned the room and the chaos within it. "There!" she cried dramatically, pointing a shaking finger toward Reena. "She blackmailed the CEO. She tricked him with a fake pregnancy for his money. Lies flowed like acid honey, sweet enough to convince the blind, deadly enough to ruin a life in seconds." Philip felt the ground shift beneath him, not from doubt, but from rage so bright it almost blinded him. Reena's breath shattered into pieces as two officers rushed toward her, cold hands grabbing her arms with zero hesitation for her condition. She winced in pain as they shoved her forward, ignoring Philip's shouts. "Stop! She's pregnant! Be careful!" he yelled, grabbing one officer's shoulder, but another struck him in the chest to push him back. The betrayal in the air was suffocating. This was supposed to be a night of new beginnings, but Serena had turned it into a nightmare tailored to isolate Reena. Tears built behind Reena's eyes as she cried, "Philip! Please!" Her voice was small, terrified, desperate, a plea that pierced all the walls around Philip's heart. He lunged again, grabbing the officer's wrist with enough force to draw blood, but they overpowered him, holding him away like he was nothing more than a dangerous man instead of a panicked father-to-be. Serena leaned close, her perfume crawling into Philip's lungs like poison ivy. "You want to protect her?" she whispered, lips twisting into a victorious smirk. "Then watch her be taken from you, forever." Those words cracked something deep and dark inside him. He stared into her eyes, the same eyes that once pretended love, now burning with pure obsession and jealousy. In that single moment, Philip truly understood. Serena didn't love him. She wanted to possess him. And anyone who stood in her way, she would destroy without mercy. That realization ignited a rage Philip had never known existed, a rage that felt like destiny sharpening its knife. "No!" Philip roared with a voice that shook chandeliers, shoving past two officers with a terrifying burst of strength, fueled by fear and devotion. He fought with the wildness of a man who'd already lost too much in life. He refused to lose something again. Officers grabbed him, but Philip slammed his fist into one's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. The other guests screamed, scrambling backward as tables overturned and glass shattered under the weight of chaos. "I said she's innocent!" he thundered, sounding like a storm made of thunder and warning. Reena's tears poured freely as she struggled, flinching every time invisible stress tightened around her belly. All she wanted was safety, for her baby, for them. but safety was being dragged farther and farther away. "Philip, it hurts," she whimpered, stumbling as the officers twisted her wrists behind her back. The fear in her voice ripped Philip's heart into sharp pieces. His hands were still pinned by two officers now, but he strained forward, veins bulging, as if he'd rip his arms off just to reach her. The image of her suffering planted guilt so deep it might never be dug out. Reena, heartless, smirking, satisfied, blew him a mocking kiss like a queen blessing her own evil victory. That tiny, cruel gesture did it. It sealed Sereena's fate in Philip's mind. He would not forgive. He would not restrain himself. He would not hesitate. Reena's safety was worth every drop of blood in this room. As they dragged Reena closer to the exit, her sobs cracked into painful breaths. The room blurred into a nightmare, every chandelier light turning into stars she couldn't reach. Her knees buckled and she nearly collapsed, but the officers continued pulling her like she was a sack and not a woman carrying a fragile life. "Careful with her!" Philip shouted again, his voice dripping with the kind of authority that had built entire empires. But his empire was no match against Sereena's vicious manipulation. His eyes locked with Reena's, hers overflowing with fear, his overflowing with unspoken promises. "I'm here," he mouthed silently. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Don't let them take me." The officers shoved open the exit door, a blast of cold night air rushing in like freedom, mocking them from a distance. Reena cried out as the pressure on her wrists sent pain shooting up her arms. Philip bit down a roar, his soul tearing apart as distance stole Reena from him inch by inch. Reena walked behind the chaos like a demon admiring her masterpiece, a twisted smile carved into her face because she believed she'd already won. But Philip wasn't a man who surrendered. He wasn't a man who failed. And tonight, he was a man on the edge of losing the greatest love he had ever known. "You will pay for this," Philip growled, not yelled, not threatened, promised. His voice dropped to the kind of cold that makes hell remember its place. Reena laughed softly, tilting her head back like she was bathed in sunlight instead of venom. "Only if you survive losing her," she replied, eyes reflecting pure madness. That sentence struck Philip harder than any punch the officers had thrown. Losing Reena was not an option. Losing his child was not a possibility. Losing his family was not even something fate could dare try. As Reena was pushed into the police vehicle, she screamed his name, a scream that didn't just echo, it bled through the night. Philip tore free from the officers with a force fueled by love and rage, sprinting toward the car like a bullet fired straight from desperation. 3 officers tackled him to the ground, pinning him as gravel scraped his palms and knees. Reena saw him fall, and her heart splintered with fear. "Philip," she sobbed, her voice breaking into shattered hope. He fought harder, his body refusing to quit, his soul refusing to accept defeat. He was ready to tear the earth apart if that's what it would take to reach her. The last thing he saw before a baton slammed against his back was Reena's hand pressed against the window, trembling, terrified, calling for him through the glass barrier. And the last thing she saw was him, struggling like a man drowning in the loss of the very air he breathes. The door slammed shut, tires screeched, and the car that carried his entire world sped away into the night. Philip lay on the cold ground, chest heaving, heart screaming, but his eyes remained deadly focused in the direction they had taken her. He pushed himself up slowly, pain clawing through his muscles, but failing to weaken his determination. "I'll bring you home," he whispered into the night, voice cracking with emotion, but solid as steel in promise. Reena watched him stand again, unbroken, and fear flickered briefly in her gaze, despite her mask of arrogance. She realized Philip wasn't crushed, he was awakened, and a man like Philip, when awakened by love and threatened by loss, becomes unstoppable. Philip turned his gaze towards Reena, and with a chilling calmness, he vowed to burn down every lie, every obstacle, every person who dared come between him and Reena. "You have declared war," he said, "and I'm the kind of man who finishes wars." Serena's smile finally faltered. Philip stood in the storm of flashing blue lights and trembling chaos, every breath he dragged into his lungs, fueled by a fury sharper than any weapon power could forge. His suit was torn, his knuckles scraped raw, but nothing mattered except the image burned into his skull, Reena being dragged away, crying, terrified, almost collapsing under fear. He marched toward Serena with a darkness so palpable that even the officers who had pinned him moments ago stepped back like the devil himself had risen from despair to take command of the night. "You think you won?" he asked, voice low, too calm to be safe. Serena's smirk wavered when he pulled out his phone, thumb pressing a secured contact that could wreck civilizations. Within minutes, black cars rolled up with his private investigators, lawyers, and 2 directors from the Internal Affairs Bureau, the true wolves in a city full of powerless sheep. Every lie Serena crafted crumbled faster than she could blink as Philip presented evidence, photos, voice recordings, forged documents, all tied to her obsession and criminal manipulation. Officers' eyes widened, their hearts dropping into pits of regret as the truth stabbed through their assumptions. Reena, still cuffed in the back of the police vehicle, trembled when the door suddenly unlocked. The officer who had manhandled her moments ago now stuttered apologies, as though begging forgiveness from a goddess who had every right to curse him. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he tried. But Reena didn't hear a thing except the pounding of her frightened heartbeat and the distant roar of Philip's voice as he tore Serena's world apart. Her knees nearly gave out when they helped her to her feet, but Philip was already sprinting toward her, his arms catching her before she could fall. "I've got you," he breathed, pulling her into him like she was the air he needed to survive. Reena collapsed against his chest, sobbing into him, the weight of everything making her shoulders shake uncontrollably. Philip's heart cracked open at the feel of her trembling. This was the damage he could not forgive. "I'm here now," he whispered fiercely, one palm cupping the back of her head, the other rubbing slow circles on her spine to ground her. "No one will touch you again. No one." But as he tried to calm her, he suddenly felt warmth spilling across his fingers, warmth thick and terrifying. His eyes dropped and dread detonated inside him. Fluid soaked her dress, trickling down his wrist like time melting away. Reena gasped, her hands flying instinctively to her belly as her face contorted in pain. "Philip," she whimpered, voice broken. "The baby. I think—" Her water had broken, and something far more frightening was happening inside her body. Panic punched the air from Philip's lungs. "Someone get a doctor! Now!" he shouted, his voice a thunderous boom that made everyone jump. He didn't wait. He lifted Reena into his arms with a tenderness wrapped in urgency, holding her as though she were made of glass that fate was trying to shatter. With every step he took toward the car, Reena clung to him, fingers knotted into his shirt like she was holding on to life itself. "Stay with me. Please stay with me," Philip begged, kissing the top of her head, his fear bleeding through each breath he forced out. Reena's breathing turned shallow, her forehead damp with sweat as pain clawed through her belly. "I'm scared, Philip," she whispered, and those 3 words nearly destroyed him. "You don't get to be scared," he choked out, voice cracking, "because I won't survive a world where you're not in it." The driver didn't even need instructions. He slammed the car into motion, tires screeching as they sped toward the hospital, with traffic parting under Philip's connections like the sea itself obeyed him. Philip held Reena tightly in the back seat, brushing her hair away from her face as she cried through contraction after contraction, each one stealing more strength than she could afford to lose. "Breathe with me," he urged, counting slowly, pressing soft kisses on her temple to keep her anchored. He could command entire industries, could crush enemies with a single order, but none of his power could take away her pain now. And that powerlessness, that fear, carved him open wider with every helpless second. By the time they stormed into the hospital, nurses were rushing forward with a stretcher, doctors barking urgent medical commands that collided with the sound of monitors and wheels racing down polished floors. Philip fought every instinct to stay at her side when they tried to separate them for emergency checks. "She needs me," he growled, and one look at the destruction in his eyes was all it took. The doctors let him stay. He held her hand tight, refusing to let go even when they tried to place IVS, check dilation, prepare surgical tools. Reena's tears streamed silently now as fear hollowed her gaze. "I'm too weak," she cried, gasping through pain that kept rising like a merciless tide. "I can't push. Philip, I can't." Her voice broke into fragile pieces. Philip leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, his hand cradling her cheek, thumb wiping her tears before they even fell. "Hey, look at me," he whispered, voice trembling with love so raw it felt like it could break the entire world open. "You are the strongest woman I've ever known. You carried our miracle. You survived hell and still stood tall. You can do this. With me." For our baby, Reena looked into his eyes, a man terrified yet unshakable, desperate yet strong enough to hold her whole world, and she nodded weakly, squeezing his hand with all the strength she had left. Labor was chaos. Time dissolved into screams, commands, machines beeping relentlessly, nurses rushing, doctors urging. Reena's cries ripped through Philip like blades, each one a reminder of his helplessness. He kissed her forehead again and again, whispering that he loved her, promising her a lifetime of peace after this storm. "Just one more push," the doctor urged. "She's right there." Philip breathed with her, his voice steady despite his trembling heart. "Come on, love. Push, just once more. Give me our baby, please." A scream tore from Reena, so fierce it felt like the sky cracked. And then, suddenly, a different sound filled the room. A tiny, powerful cry. The cry of life. The cry of their child. The doctor lifted a small, wriggling body, announcing words that stunned Philip's heart into stillness. "It's a girl!" A daughter, their daughter, crying like she was demanding the world listen. Tears streamed down Philip's face without restraint, a breathtaking smile breaking through as the doctor placed the baby against Reena's chest. Philip kissed their daughter's forehead, overwhelmed by awe. She was real, she was beautiful, and she was theirs. But joy lasted only a heartbeat, because Reena went still. Her eyes fluttered closed, her body slackened. The heart monitor beside her, the one that had been a steady reassurance through pain, gave a sharp alarm, then a long, terrifying flat tone. A straight line shot across the screen. No rhythm, no beat, no life. The baby wailed. Philip's entire existence stopped. His heart, his breath, his sanity, everything froze as though death had claimed time itself. "Reena," he whispered, voice shattering. "No, no, no, no." His hands shook violently as he grabbed her face, tapping her cheeks, desperate to wake her. Doctors shoved him back, rushing into emergency intervention, shouting orders that blurred together. "Code blue! Cardiac arrest! Get the paddles! Start compressions!" Philip staggered, collapsing against the wall as his world began to collapse with her. His daughter's cries pierced the air, but all he saw was the love of his life slipping farther away with every passing second. Reena's body wasn't moving. Her heart wasn't beating. The line on the monitor stayed flat, unmoving, merciless. Philip's throat tore as he screamed her name. "Reena!" Philip's scream still echoed in the sterile walls of the hospital room as the world seemed to collapse onto his shoulders, crushing him beneath a grief he refused to accept. His fist slammed against the crash cart, his voice breaking into something raw and wounded, as if the heavens themselves were being torn apart by his pain. Reena's pale body lay motionless under the cold hospital lights, wires tangled around her like chains, trying to pull her away from him forever. Philip couldn't breathe. The air was poison without her. Doctors pushed him back, but he fought them like a wild animal stripped of everything it loved. "Don't take her from me," he roared, veins bulging, tears streaking down his face as his knees buckled beneath the weight of his terror. His newborn daughter cried relentlessly in the background, her tiny voice screaming life while her mother's slipped away. The doctor yelled for more epinephrine. A nurse climbed onto the bed to perform chest compressions, her hands pressing rhythmically, desperate to beat life back into Reena's heart. Philip's world narrowed to a tunnel around Reena's still chest. Every thud of the defibrillator made him flinch, like he was being electrocuted too. The monitor stayed flat, a merciless straight line mocking hope. Philip clutched his daughter against him, his tears dripping into her soft hair as he whispered broken promises into her tiny ear. "Your mama. She's the reason I live, and I won't let her leave us. I won't." His voice shattered again, choking on memories, her smile, her laugh, the night their fates collided, all slipping through his fingers like fragile glass. Seconds felt like hours, each one more unbearable than the last. Then, a miracle, a tiny twitch, barely there, but Philip saw it, then another, and suddenly a sound that resurrected the dead pieces of his heart. Beep. Everyone froze. Nurses paused mid-movement. The doctor's breath hitched. Philip's eyes widened as the flatline broke. A single heartbeat, then another. Louder, stronger, faster. Beep, 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 beep. Reena inhaled sharply, like someone drowning who finally found the surface. Her chest lifted in a powerful gasp, and her eyes fluttered open, blurred but searching. And the first face she found was his. "Philip," she whispered, voice faint but alive. Alive. He collapsed beside the bed, tears falling like a storm of relief, his forehead pressed against her hand as he sobbed into her skin, thanking the universe, thanking destiny, thanking every divine force that had listened to his desperation. "I'm here. I'm right here," he breathed, kissing her knuckles again and again, like every touch could stitch her soul back into her body. The doctor placed the baby gently into Reena's trembling arms, and when the tiny girl nestled against her mother, Reena's heartbeat steadied further, as if love itself commanded her to live. She looked down at their daughter with tears shining like stars in her lashes. "She's perfect," Reena whispered, voice cracking as her thumb brushed the baby's soft cheek. Philip cupped her face, his thumb wiping the moisture from the corner of her lips, his forehead touching hers tenderly. "You came back to me," he breathed, voice trembling. "I will spend every breath I have loving you, protecting you, never losing you again." Reena weakly smiled, her hand brushing the tears from his jaw. "I felt you holding on," she whispered, "and I knew I had to come back." Philip kissed her softly, a promise sealed with every heartbeat he'd nearly lost. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, silence brought peace instead of terror. Their daughter curled her tiny fingers around Philip's thumb, and he felt something inside him shift, a vow written into the core of his existence. No one would ever threaten what he loved again. But peace doesn't linger long when evil lurks. A nurse burst through the door, breathless, panic ripping through her face. "Sir, it's urgent," she gasped, eyes darting toward Philip like she was delivering a message from the devil. Philip stood slowly, his body stiffening, instincts sharp. "What happened?" he demanded, voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The nurse swallowed, fear tightening her throat. The woman who caused all this, the one you ordered to keep under strict watch. Philip's blood turned to ice, hands curling into fists, ready to break the world. She escaped custody. For a moment, silence strangled the room. Reena, free, a serpent loose, a storm returning. Philip's gaze darkened, not with fear, but with a lethal promise. No one threatened his family and lived. Send security to every exit, he ordered, voice cold, lethal, unstoppable. Lock down this hospital. Now his eyes flicked back to Reena and the baby, the two souls anchoring his heart, and a vow burned behind every word he spoke. Next, if Reena comes near them again, I will end this myself. Reena wasn't gone. She was coming back. And this time, she wouldn't fail. Philip didn't waste a single heartbeat when Reena and their daughter were cleared to leave the hospital. The moment they stepped out into the cool night air, he had already positioned a convoy of armored SUVs, bulletproof from the tires to the roof, with his most trusted security personnel flanking every doorway, every shadow, every possible threat. His jaw remained hard as steel, but his eyes, those rare, vulnerable eyes, never left Reena for even a second. She sat in the back seat, their tiny newborn snuggled against her chest, the rhythmic rise and fall of the baby's breathing grounding her in a reality she once believed she would never see. Reena kept pressing soft kisses on their daughter's forehead, inhaling that sweet new life scent, as though it was the oxygen her heart needed to survive. She was alive. Her baby was alive. Philip had fought death itself to pull her back, and now she was wrapped in the safest arms she could ever imagine. Their mansion wasn't just a home anymore. It stood as a fortress, reinforced gates, cameras tracking even the flutter of a leaf, guards stationed at every corner, eyes unblinking, weapons ready to silence darkness before it could whisper. When Philip carried Reena over the threshold, holding both her and their sleeping daughter with a tenderness that defied the cold-hearted billionaire the world believed him to be, Reena's heart nearly burst. The man who once guarded his emotions like locked vaults was now cradling his entire life in his arms. He guided her gently to the master bedroom, laying her on the soft sheets like she was made of something too delicate for the world to touch. He kissed her forehead, then the scar above her heart, the reminder of how close he had come to losing her. His lips lingered there, trembling slightly, as though every kiss was another promise he carved into the universe. She would never be hurt again. Reena gazed at him, fingers brushing his cheek, feeling the faint stubble that scratched affection into her palm. "Philip," she whispered, the name a soft melody of devotion and awe. "You saved my life. Again. How will I ever repay you?" He shook his head, eyes burning with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You already have," he murmured. "You stayed. You fought your way back. You gave me our daughter. Reena, I am the one who is in debt forever." She smiled, tears shimmering like diamonds as she looked down at the tiny angel resting in her arms. Their baby stretched her little hand outward, and Philip caught her fingers, watching how small she was compared to his broad palm, and yet how completely she owned him. Reena leaned closer, whispering, "She's our miracle." Philip nodded, voice rough with love. "You both are, and I will destroy anything that ever dares to come near my miracles again." As the hours passed, warmth returned to the mansion like dawn breaking after years of winter. Philip fed Reena warm soup with his own hands, making sure she never lifted a finger, because her only focus should be healing and loving their daughter. He watched Reena hold the baby against her chest, rocking gently, humming a lullaby that filled the room with a peace Philip didn't think he would ever feel again. He sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling them both into him. For the first time in his life, his heart felt full, painfully full, beautifully full. He kissed Reena's temple, whispering, "Our family is the only truth that matters." She pressed her cheek into his chest, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat that had guided hers back from the edge of death. "I believe in you now," she said softly. Not the ruthless businessman, but the man who loves too deeply to ever abandon what's his. Their daughter giggled suddenly, a tiny burst of music that wiped away every shadow of yesterday's fear. Philip and Reena both laughed, a sound of pure relief and overflowing love. Philip lifted their baby carefully in his strong arms, bouncing her gently while she cooed happily, discovering the world for the first time. He held her up near his face, placing a kiss on her nose, and when she smiled, a real little smile, his whole chest cracked open with joy so strong he almost couldn't breathe. Reena captured the moment in her mind like a precious painting she would revisit for the rest of her life. The cold billionaire smiling with a warmth that melted every icy rumor the world had ever believed about him. Love had done what no business rival, no power, no wealth could ever accomplish. It had transformed his soul. Fireworks exploded across the sky outside, brilliant reds and golds bursting into blossoms of light, celebrating victory, celebrating new beginnings. The glittering reflections danced across Reena's eyes as Philip stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. Together, they watched the sky sparkle with life, each firework a reminder that they had survived the unthinkable and earned this happiness with blood and tears. Reena exhaled slowly, leaning into him. "It finally feels like our future is safe," she said, a prayer disguised as a truth she desperately wanted to believe in. Philip kissed her shoulder, his grip tightening protectively. "It is. I swear it. As long as I'm breathing, nothing will ever take you or our daughter from me. But peace, real peace, is fragile." Just as Reena traced a finger across Philip's knuckles, a sudden scent pierced the room's tranquility. A haunting sweetness, a perfume too familiar, a perfume that once slithered around their lives like poison, Serena. Reena's body stiffened instantly, maternal instinct roaring like wildfire through her veins. Philip sensed the shift in the air at the same moment, his entire demeanor changing within a breath. His warmth vanished. The softness in his eyes iced over. The protector returned, the fighter, the storm. He handed the baby to Reena with careful urgency, his every movement controlled, but deadly. "Stay with her," he whispered, voice low, voice lethal. A knock pounded at the front door, not timid, not hesitant, bold, like a challenge. Reena clutched their daughter closer, heart racing so fast she feared it might choke her. Philip signaled one of his guards silently, and instantly the halls flooded with trained bodies, guns drawn, formation precise. He strode toward the entrance, every step echoing with murderous promise. No fear, just wrath. Because anyone daring to come near his family tonight had signed their death sentence. The knock came again, slower this time, taunting. Philip unlocked the massive door, but didn't open it wide. Just enough to see the figure standing in the night's darkness, the moon illuminating her twisted smile. Serena, bruised from her previous failures, eyes blazing with obsession, voice dripping like venom, stood there, breathing heavily, clutching something behind her back. "Did you really think you could hide them from me forever?" she hissed. Philip said nothing. Words were too generous for a monster like her. His glare alone promised the destruction she was foolish enough to seek. Serena's expression trembled, halfway between fury and desperation. "He should have been mine. That baby should have been mine. You took everything from me," she shrieked, leaning forward, the tip of a blade catching the moonlight. The guards raised their weapons instantly, but Philip lifted a single hand. No one moved. He stepped out, facing her alone. "If you ever try to hurt my wife or my daughter again," his voice dropped so low it was almost a growl, "I won't let the law save you." Serena lunged, a desperate final act of insanity. but she never reached him. The guards tackled her to the ground before the blade even came close, disarming her, pinning her wrists painfully behind her back. Serena screamed and spat, but Philip just looked down at her with a chilling calm she could never understand, because rage wasn't controlling him. Love was, and love is far more dangerous. He nodded once. She was dragged away, this time to a fate where she would never escape again. Philip shut the door with a controlled breath and turned back toward the living room. Reena stood there, their baby held tightly in her arms, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, relief, fear, love, all mixing together. Philip walked straight into her arms, encircling both of them with his body like a fortress made of flesh and devotion. He kissed Reena, hard, passionate, claiming his life back from the nightmare that tried to steal it. Reena melted into him, her heart beating against his like a promise that they would always return to each other, no matter what evil dared to come near. He rested his forehead against hers, voice once again soft, human, overflowing with love only she had ever seen. "Forever protected," he whispered. Reena nodded, brushing her nose against his. "Forever loved," she replied. Philip looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the war fought in her name, and he smiled with a pride that lit him brighter than any firework still bursting over the sky. Their family, their miracle, was whole, safe, untouchable, together, and as the night wrapped them in stars and triumph, Philip sealed their future with a truth that would never be broken. "As long as I breathe, nothing will ever take our love away." The end, a strong, safe, forever family. Thank you so much for watching this powerful story till the end. If it touched your heart even a little, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Beyond Color Stories, because more breathtaking and soul-shaking stories are coming your way very soon.